that third change in my voice. I'm sure we can all agree that people should have a right to criticize America, whether they're born here or not. I happen to be born in America, in California, which is the state that most people consider the most important state in America. It's the fourth or fifth biggest economy in the world by itself, from what I'm told. And I live in a very interesting place that was historically very liberal until the last 15 years or so, when corporations utterly terrorized the Democratic Party in a certain way that made it so that people were less free than at any point in my lifetime. So let's talk about the Klan and clandestine organizations here. So the Klan was a group that was very much affiliated with the government. Many of them were police officers, government workers, governors, mayors. They tried to, run for president, right? We see with David Duke and his political activity. Nathan Bedford Forrest was a former Confederate officer. A lot of these Klan members were. They were very much involved in the political process of America in various ways. At one point, somewhere around 100,000 Klan members or so marched on Washington in the 1920s. William Joseph Simmons, who was the founder of the Second Klan, which was the biggest Klan ever, was a member of like 24 fraternal organizations, according to Wikipedia, which has an extensive article on the Ku Klux Klan, with many sources, mind you. So what did the Klan do? And why am I making this video in regards to racism and how racists operate these days? Well, the Klan ran psychological operations first and foremost. The vast majority of Ku Klux Klan activities were psychological. And it wasn't just burning crosses. They would harass people. A huge part of Klan activity was harassing people. We see with the black faces historically, these actors were very much associated with the Klan because they had shared cultural values with the Klan. So almost certainly some of these guys were from Ku Klux Klan families. So we see the movie The Birth of a Nation. The idea was to make a white nation, not necessarily a Klan nation. And if the Klan angle wasn't working, they were going to work other angles. They didn't like that the slaves were set free. They were concerned with the social order. Some of them were Freemasons and other types of people who had a long-term plan and vision for America, which included making black people and other colored people second-class citizens to a certain degree. And they were very much the type of people that hate women for no good reason. They didn't have a strong moral foundation for their resentment for women. They weren't somebody who was, mistreated by women their whole life or something. They were people who mistreated females, and females were responding to that mistreatment. And over the years, we saw the 60s and the 70s where people were responding to the various hateful activities, including the activities of the Second and Third Klan. And so there was a kind of a social response to that was somewhat controlled by various fraternal organizations and sororities, like the Eastern Star, which is a group that also includes a lot of gay males and males in general. Okay, but it's so much, it's full of so many females that it's basically like a sorority. So it goes beyond college frats. It goes into the realm of the several million Masons or so that we have here in America. There was one incident that I brought up in my videos before in Michigan, where there were a bunch of people who were Freemasons. They joined the Klan, and when the Klan in their small town fell out of favor, they went back to Freemasonry. So these are people who had strong ties to the other fraternal organizations in America. It also used similar occult language and wordplay and things of that nature. So what we see in America, I think that one of the biggest problems we see here is that there's a bunch of people who are racist who harass people subtly. Let me give you an example here. If you were black and you're driving around in a car, imagine you're black, you're driving in, say, a Ford Fusion, what the heck? You're driving around and you get to town every day and you see a couple people who look at you and say, hey boy, come pick up this trash. And you didn't throw the trash there or nothing. And they're talking to you in a condescending way. And you're thinking, why did they use the word boy? And why are they telling me to pick up that trash? I don't work there, and has nothing to do with me. I just got here. You probably think, hey, maybe these people are racist. And you'd be a little bit ticked off about it. Maybe you'd argue with them a little bit. Okay. Say the next day you came to somewhere else in that town. And it's in California, not in the South, mind you. And they were saying, hey, and they kind of snickered and they kind of made a kind of mocker-like face. Hey, come pick up this trash here. And they didn't say boy or anything else. And you're like, man, what the hell are they talking about, right? They're sensitizing you to that issue with an emphasis on racism, okay? And as you try to complain, people start playing stupid. They start gaslighting you, which goes back to lighting the cross, right? Gaslight. How do you light the cross, right? One way is you might use some gasoline. I don't know how they do it, but that's what comes to mind. It's also play on words for gaze light. No offense to the LGBT community. It's not just that the Klan used to gaze at the burning cross. They would stare at it, right? It's that they would also be sort of LGBT-ish, with the black faces, with the mockery. They would do things that are very much associated with a gay parade or a gay like circus or something. Even the circus, if you think about it, is gayish, right? The colors, the physique of people, the gender neutrality. It emerges at a time where it was very suspicious for females to gather in that sort of way, for that sort of purpose in a society that was very, you might say, conservative, and reserved and what have you, basically. So they're kind of mocking you like a gay person would and like someone in the Klan would, while bearing in mind that Christianity is a religion that upholds, that more often than not, people who are Christians uphold, you might say, Jewish supremacy to some degree, right? We see it with the current Christian dispensationalists, so the churches who are kissing up to Israel, who in turn historically kisses up to the European governing class, and the European governing class is a mix of white, Jew, and LGBT people, for the most part. Okay. So you see how this thing all kind of comes together. So when we look at how the laws are made, they're made for these kind of beta-like frat people and then brutes, a big angry guy, maybe works out, maybe he's a skinhead, maybe he's just a big craftsman from the South or something, for these people to kind of collaborate and provoke and create certain situations where people are triggered to do things they otherwise wouldn't. And so as we look at the history of Klan provocations and the violence aimed at black people, and how there was an outcry from the white community for them to stop the violence, just like there was the abolitionist movement. So these people decided that they wanted to be more subtle with their racial terrorism, with their racial social control, okay, with their social, economic, and political control, with an emphasis on race. And we see it in popular culture, for nothing else, there's an emphasis on black people. They don't like Native Americans, generally speaking, Hispanics, Asians. You go through the list. To some degree, some of these people don't like Jews, and some Jews don't like them, and so on and so forth. But they always put the emphasis on black people. When you think of the Klan, the first thing you think of is they lynched black people, right? Most people think of it that way. When you think of neo-Nazis, right? Whether it's Higher Learning or American History X, okay, or the movie South Central, they're clashing with black people in the movie. It's quite often in terms of in more recent history, movies that depict more recent history, than they are with Jews. So we see that their racial emphasis tends to be aimed at black people. In fact, when they call people from the Middle East names, they often call them sand N-words and dune C-words. Okay, the word that rhymes with dune. That's not a coincidence. So there's all kinds of cute little tricks they use to try to provoke black people. They also at times use black people themselves. They want them to feel a certain way. So when we look at the fraternal structure of society, it's designed to social engineer And some black people and other minorities, sold their souls to uphold the process. And sometimes they're crypto Jews, and we see that a lot in the modern time. But the main reason I made this video, and this other stuff is important, should be said to be fair to everybody. The truth is fair to everybody and what have you. The main reason I made it is to highlight the idea of provocation. Racial provocation doesn't always come with racist words. We see racial rants on YouTube and stuff like this. That's peanuts compared to what the government is doing. In fact, if you're not somebody who thinks of it in terms of eugenics and social Darwinism and social engineering and biology and demographics and gentrification, if you don't think of it that way, the racism you probably think of is peanuts. Millions and millions and millions of people have been starved to death and killed in the last 100 years, hundreds of millions perhaps, just however many, it's many tens of millions, we'll say lots and lots and lots of them, right? 9 million die every year due to starvation because of the racist social engineering of the world, and they're by far disproportionately people of color. Okay? And lots of them are black. So, the major form of racism and racist violence is in the form of psychological operations that provoke and cause racial violence. And they prevent a solution. Like COINTELPRO was about preventing the rise of a black messiah. Why? Because that would either reduce the harm, the violence in the black community and the preventable deaths and suffering, or it would damn near, cause it to cease altogether. So they said they wanted to prevent the solution. How? Using psychological operations. And that, of course, was in very recent history. In fact, I would argue COINTELPRO never ended. We're on COINTELPRO like 3.0, 4.0 by now. So we see the overwhelming amount of evidence that these psychological operations continue. Okay? There are assets for various intelligence organizations and hate groups. And part of what they do, they say, go this way with it and go that way with it. I know firsthand, because of my experience in the streets, I know firsthand that that's how it works. If you look at the Big U situation in the news with the Rolling 60, who's said to be a Rolling 60 gang leader. Certainly he's a very influential Rolling 60 gang member from Los Angeles, Rolling 60 neighborhood Crip. Okay, this also happens to be an organization whose at least one member, or someone who purports to be a member of that organization, sought to recruit me and sought to use me and try to play me like a fiddle. Okay, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I put that in my story. That's a story for another day. It's in my story playlist. There were so many psychological operations involved with that organization that they even, tried to inject they even tried to use it on me. And I live in the San Jose, California area in Morgan Hill, which is about 6 to 8 hours from Los Angeles, depending on how you drive. California is a really long state, and it stretches out for hours north. Going north for hundreds of miles going north from the Bay Area, from San Jose, the South Bay. So there are few of me, making it harder for me to talk, mind you. Speak of psychological operations, right? Speak of the devil. So when we look at this thing, it's not as simple as, black people have a temper problem, right? Now let's look at this thing. They work the angles. As they sit down and they hash out the details, they sat down with Big Pharma, and these people make record profits. They sell painkillers illegally. They find different ways to sell them to the streets. It's a long story how they do that. It has to do with who has a license to sell, how they're made, what have you. And they flooded the streets with blues and other, pharmaceuticals that massacre people. It's not just fentanyl, it's also pharmaceuticals. Fentanyl, distracts you from the pharma cost. But it is a serious, serious issue. And it goes back to chemical warfare. And what you might call biological warfare, as they're looking at people's biology, their racial biology, that, how it concerns biology and demographics. Okay, and scientific racism. They're looking at it scientifically in terms of your biology to a large degree. And not just race, but patriarchal lines and so on and so forth. So, as they kind of provoke people, some of these people go to the psych ward. And they have to pay lots of money, right? Just the ambulance bill, even if you have insurance, is like over $1,000. And then you stay in the psych ward almost certainly for 2 weeks. That's their protocol. They don't release people until they stabilize them on medication, typically speaking. So there's this massive racket associated with psychological operations. And they're getting people to kill each other. And there's the prison industrial complex, there was the private prisons. I haven't been keeping up with that. Maybe they shut them down, but for a while there, they had private prisons. They had all kinds of problems there because they were so quick to try to make money, just like with hospitals putting profit over patients and what have you, that they didn't bother to make sure that they had the proper security mechanisms in place, which the government prisons, don't have in place anyway. People get, killed and beaten and raped and abused in all sorts of ways and extorted in the prison system all the time. Now, I'm having trouble speaking, so let me just wrap this up real quickly here. It is not okay for a bunch of betas to team up with a bunch of other betas and brutes in the government and law enforcement, no offense to anybody, and to provoke people and get them killed. We're talking about these black people being gunned down by police. A lot of these cops are trigger happy. Some of them aren't so trigger happy. Some of these cases aren't so clear cut. Some of these cases, the cops were technically in the right. And a lot of black people start saying they're in the wrong, and it contributes to the madness. It's important to tell the truth about everything. And what has happened here is that years and years of psychological operations, of chemical operations, right, have come to a head until there's just sheer madness in the streets here. People are a lot less tough than they used to be in the 90s, the average gang member, average street thug, what have you. But they're like a lot more crazy because of years of psychological operations and crack babies and the sabotage of reproduction, which is aimed at the black people disproportionately. The reason why black people disproportionately commit street crimes at a higher rate, if that's even true, right, is because they're targeted disproportionately. The most violent cities are cities where black people are committing the most violence. At one point, the penitentiary was 45% black. And a lot of these people come from very peaceful tribes in Africa, relatively peaceful. African tribes weren't some kind of bloodthirsty tribes for the most part. There weren't major wars in Africa until after colonialism. And it had something to do with, Islam and Arab colonialism. And it had something to do with white colonialism. And then we see these nations being carved out of certain areas that have tribes that don't necessarily get along, and they now have to kind of share the same government, and they start fighting for control, and people throw fuel in the fire, and psychological operations come into play. The reason why there's proxy governments at play and that they go so smoothly is that there are psychological operations going on here and abroad. Okay, so let me just go ahead and end it there. But by now you should have no doubt in your mind that I'm right, that there are people sensitizing people, and they're provoking them. So if you were to see some black person yell in the streets about how he's going to kill, say, some white person and calls them names and so on and so forth, I want you to truly understand, believe it or not, as racist as it might sound, that the white man started it one way or another. He didn't allow him to have his black leaders. He put stuff in the food in the air. He disproportionately targeted them. When poor white people see it, they often say, hey, don't make it about race, which threw more fuel on the fire. Okay, which is also them acting like a slave master, cracking their whips, saying, don't make it about race and we'll help you. But to not make it about race is to not solve the problem. And some of these problems are very race specific. And so when you look at all the things they've done with the pharmaceutical sectors, with psychology, with the school system, with the job market, with dating, okay, all the areas of life that they've attacked them, and all the research that's available that proves that that's the case and how people are playing stupid, it is clear that you're seeing a response to the calculated targeting of black people, the extreme oppression of black people and other people as well, other people of color and poor white people as well. But it's important to highlight that black people take the brunt of it. And to highlight it doesn't mean that they're going to take over society or something, okay? But it's to do that idea justice, okay? If there's a shooting in the streets and one kid gets shot in the head and he's bleeding out, but he's not dead yet. Another one gets shot, he get grazed in the shoulder. If they responded like they got hurt equally, would that be a fair response? No. You have to treat the situation like the situation calls to be treated.